Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Govs on the Go, Alumni Edition, a podcast featuring alumni from the College of Arts and Letters here at Austin Peay State University. My name is Dr. Buzz Hoon. I'm the Dean of the college. I'm also the host of the podcast. And today I'm talking with Kaylee Edmonson, who graduated with a degree in corporate communication back in 2015. Kaylee, thanks for being on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, and we're going to be talking, it seems like it was probably yesterday for you, but it's almost 10 years separated. And we'll be talking about what kind of things have happened to you along the way. But let's start with that. Let's just tell everybody where you are and what's going on in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's crazy to think it's been 10 years. It doesn't feel like it's been 10 years in any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, fast forward 10 years. And today I'm, calling in for this podcast from home. I work remotely and have for the last 6 or 7 years or so, married with 2 kids and still live, just right down the interstate from Clarksville. So
yeah,
that's what's
and
new.
I think that I love talking and hearing stories about how, you're from Pleasant View. And I think that as a smaller community, there's something about the community that helps shape us into who you are. What kind of things did you like to do? And what kind of people might have had an influence on you early on?
Yeah, well, I've lived here my entire life, so I've never known anything else. I definitely do love finding myself in a small town, small community vibes. Everybody knows everybody. I largely went to school, like elementary school, middle, and high school with the same group of friends, which for me, I love. Most of those friends are still my close friends to this day. So I think that I've had a really good, close-knit support group my entire life, which I still lean on every day now. Just, the phone calls are more about like parenting woes versus class struggles. But same group of friends has supported me throughout. I think that Pleasant View offers, not that this is a pitch for more people to move to Pleasant View because we like to keep it small, but Pleasant View offers this community where, on Sunday you go to the grocery store and you run into your second grade teacher and you sit and you have to buffer in like, a 3-hour trip to the grocery store because you run into everybody you've ever known. And I love that. So everybody's just always been here to support me and here to support others. And I think that's just like part of the benefit of being small. The con is that, it takes you 3 hours to grab your groceries on the weekend, but I've had a lot of like supportive and instrumental figures at various points in my life. And for the most part, some of those teachers were high school teachers that really just leaned in. I think high school was like an interesting development point for me as a kid. I had a lot of things going on personally that I just like leaned into school hard. So I found myself, I was an athlete, if people want to consider cheering athletic. I was an athlete. I was on yearbook club. I was student council, vice president, and several other like extracurricular activities, and just felt really supported by the community that all of those aspects gave to me.
Yeah, I was going to say you have this not only a creative soul, but I think a very courageous soul. You put yourself out there, and so that early on, that must have been very evident, and it sure was in high school. And so, I like the fact that, as you mentioned, I also was from a smaller community, and I can say your kids are probably not going to enjoy those 3-hour trips to the grocery store as they get older.
Yeah, probably not. For the most part, we normally split between my husband and I grocery duties because of that, because the kids are always like, we don't want to go. We want to stay home.
You talk too much when you go to the grocery store.
Honestly, but in that same vein, our oldest is in first grade now, and she is being taught by teachers that taught my husband and I, which is really full circle.
Yeah, and the fact that, as you said, teachers, when they see somebody that's willing to have an interest and put themselves out there, how much that they'll help push that student along and encourage them. And that's the joy of being a teacher. And I'm glad you found people along the way to help you out.
Likewise. Yeah. I can't imagine, honestly, being where I am without them. So it's kind of strange to think how life would have been different if some of those wouldn't have leaned in, when I'm like asking questions or expressing that I'm like going through a lot. If one of them wouldn't have leaned in, like maybe everything would look different.
So how did we get lucky enough to have you come to Austin Peay?
What a great question. So, when I was considering going to college, I was a first generation college student. So, neither of my parents had gone to college. By the time that I was getting ready to go to college, my dad had already passed away. My mom was clueless about what college looked like, what it should look like, how do you apply, how do you pick where to go, which meant like I largely leaned on counselors at school and peers and friends that I was in high school with to try and figure out what I might want to do. I think looking back, it's like if you would have told 18-year-old me, like, oh, you're going to run your own practice and you're going to help software companies with their marketing, I probably would have laughed. There's no way I would have even known that was a career option or a career choice, let alone known where to select to go to school to help solidify that future for myself. So for me, it came down to a few things. I thought I really wanted to cheer in college. I thought that was going to be important to me. I knew that I would probably need to be very close to home, given my home life and my relationship with my mom. I needed to be close to support her. But I was also a full-time employee at that point. I was working full-time to support myself, to help support my mom. And I couldn't turn off that revenue stream to change, turn with one thing off to turn college on. So like all of those factors, plus I had a huge interest in marketing, led me directly to Austin Peay. Going to Austin Peay allowed me to stay at home, keep my full-time job, commute to school, take online classes, take in-person classes, and get the degree that I wanted.
Oh, that's excellent that and we were fortunate to have you in our communication program. And let's talk a little bit about some of the classes and the professors that you remember or enjoyed during that period of time.
Oh, you should have asked me this before. Now I'm going to need to try and like remember names. I remember like first and foremost, Pam Gray was such an influential teacher. I still love her so much to this day. Like anytime we get a chance to pass notes or swap notes online, I'm always just like so thankful for her wisdom. Jessica Morris was my event and comms teacher there. I actually did so much while I was there to try and take every class she taught. If it was like adjacently related to my major and she taught it, I would like fight in line, stay up until the like classroom opened to like try and get first dibs on getting a seat in her class. She was actually one of the first. So she was younger in her career when I was there. Obviously, this was 10 years ago. And she was a hard working mom and was one of the first professors that I had seen creating this like beautiful blend between being very successful in the office at work and being a very active and involved parent. And I just like loved her and looked up to her so much for that. I'm trying to think. I'm sure there are like so many people I'm going to forget. Oh, help me remember his name. He was a comms professor as well. He might not be there anymore. I think he was also involved in sorority life.
Would it be Mike Dunn?
Mike Dunn. I was like thinking his last name was Dunn, but then I was like, is that wrong? It's been a long time. Mike Dunn was also just like so charismatic in the classroom, like was interesting at weaving real life into the textbook. To create like lessons that jumped off the page. And he was also just like always throwing jokes and just very approachable. I remember one year I was going in for course selection for the next semester and was so conflicted about what I should really be focusing on. Should I be changing my minor? Like I just had kind of like a mid college crisis where I was just like, am I sure I'm doing the right thing? And he just happened to be down the hall and poked his head in and was like, can I help? And like just sat down and had a really good conversation about like, what do you enjoy? What do you not enjoy? Like, where do you see yourself doing? Like even 2 years from now, where do you want to be? Like, where do you want to work? What do you want to do? What kind of projects make you excited? Like, and just kind of, again, was like bringing that textbook into real life and making applicable scenarios for me to help just solidify that I was on the right path and like didn't need to do a whole course correction and change my plans.
So as a non-traditional student, and you mentioned that you were trying to take as many online classes as possible, but did you see, looking back now, after some time has passed, that even then you were sort of managing your career just as you ended up as you are now?
Yeah, it's a good thought, honestly. Maybe so. I think that I've always been like hyper productive at my core. Like I've always been multitasking to some degree. Um, and yes, maybe that's more obvious now. At the time, I think that it was just like the mentality of like doing whatever I needed to do to make sure
Right.
that like I could set myself up for success, set my mom up for success, and give us opportunities that we hadn't had. So I think I was like almost like survivor's mentality at the time. Um, and just like always having to put one foot in front of the other was really where I was thinking. But looking back on it, yeah, maybe you're right.
Well, that's something I noticed, and the other thing that I was sort of going to ask you about. You mentioned that you were working. So, is it true? I heard this story that you were
Oh
selected as the
no.
best car hop for Sonic Drive-In.
I think we can directly blame Sam for this accolade. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, it's true. It's true. I leaned hard into school. I leaned hard into academics, and I also leaned hard into work. So I'm very competitive by nature, if that's not obvious yet. And in high school, I started working as many hours as I could squeeze on the books at Sonic, which was, a local drive-in near our high school. And I stayed there through college. So I ended up working 6 or 7 years, I think, at Sonic. And they run this annual competition. There's a cash prize. That cash prize would allow me to say that I graduated debt free. And so I was like, okay, well, I got to go win this. So, yes.
Well, but that's an awesome achievement, Kaylee. I mean, to be selected for that achievement. I mean, because you were working anyway. I mean, why not lean into it as you've done in so many other things, whether it was academics or your professional career as you go on. You showed that sort of mentality about like attacking the rest of the world. It's so courageous.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I think that I always have like clear motivations. Like there's always some type of like clear motivating factor for me, whether it's to like help further myself, help further those around me. For this one, it was like very clear that I really wanted to be able to say that I graduated debt free.
That's
So I'd
great.
worked hard on academics to get as many scholarships as I could, but inevitably there was still some left on the line. And this cash prize would get me over, to being able to say that was something I also accomplished. So really for me, it was more so the graduation fee, not so much the like 6.5 foot tall trophy that they gave me, but nonetheless, it's still following me around. So it must mean something.
Okay. So do you still have the trophy?
It's in my mom's attic. Yes.
Oh my. It should be seated right behind you.
100%. For the next time we interview, I'll reassemble it and put it over here for you.
That would be, I would really appreciate that. And as you mentioned, I did get that from Sam Miner and Julia, who both talked so many, said so many great things about you as a friend, and also that recommended you highly for this time, because they said you also very admired for what you're doing with your professional career. So let's talk a little bit about what happened after graduation.
Yeah. Okay. So I graduated and I graduated a year early. And then I'm like, cool, what do I actually want to do? I have this other, like, kind of like a moment of just like, there's so many options out there that my dad was a mechanic and he owned his own business. My mom has always been a cosmetologist and she's worked at various studios across Middle Tennessee and very blue collar. I didn't have any of those skills that either of them had. And so everything that I had thought, right? I was on yearbook staff in high school. I really enjoyed English language. I really enjoyed writing. I do lean in a little bit more on the creativity scale. And now I have this degree in Corp Com. Like, but what does that actually mean? Like, how can I go apply it? Obviously, some very critical meetings with Mike Dunn and Pam Gray and several others to try and figure out all the ways that this degree can help me like manifest what I wanted my future to be. But honestly, there's so many options that I'm like, okay, well, how do I actually like take this and start learning? Again, I knew I had some criteria I needed to work within. I didn't ever want to move. I love Tennessee. I want to be here forever. It needed to be commutable from Pleasant View, like all these types of things that I knew I needed to work within. So I used that as my guardrails to try and figure out where I could start. Nashville, no surprise, it has a huge healthcare scene. So there are tons of companies hiring for healthcare. And that's where I started. So I actually got to start as a marketing and education coordinator at a local healthcare company. And that role in and of itself, I think was a huge jumping off point for me because as the coordinator for the rest of the marketing department, I had really good exposure to a proper PR team, an in-house digital team, an in-house graphic design team, and supported all of them for all of our campaign launches and all those good things. And throughout that experience, I fell in love with what at the time was called digital marketing, and just got as close as I could to the gal who ran the digital marketing programming there. And she truthfully took me under her wing, taught me everything she knew, and then turned in her notice and left the company. And they gave her role to me, which was amazing. And so then from there, I was like, okay, well, I really love digital. What can I do with this? At that point, I was kind of ready to move on. I was like excited about other opportunities that were starting to come my way on LinkedIn and ended up selecting to go into this in-house, small startup that was actually serving the nonprofit community with a nonprofit CRM. And I became their first founding demand gen marketer. And then the slope gets slippery after that. So from there, I like never looked back, right? I fell in love with this world of what's called B2B SaaS. We love acronyms, but it means you are a business selling to other businesses, and SaaS stands for software as a service. And so now I've been in SaaS for 9 years.
So, and that's remarkable that you continued, you must have been a sponge is what I'm thinking, that every opportunity that you got to learn something new, you were taking that in and you were just growing as an individual, because I've seen what you're able to offer now, but every opportunity that you were then provided, you were trying to grow and take that and move on.
100%, right? I think that it's like growing for yourself and growing for those around you, right?
Sure.
Everything that I learn also like helps my peers and helps my teammates just to get better and further their own craft. And honestly, just to like accomplish more together as a team is always like a good feeling. So yeah, I think like being a sponge is a huge lesson for anything at any point in your career. There's always going to be 10 people in the room that know more than you. So take every opportunity you can to like learn from them.
So when did you determine that your career path would not follow the traditional career path, and the fact that you wanted to have a family and you wanted to work remotely?
So I always knew that I wanted to have a family. I didn't really know until the opportunity was handed to me that remote work was going to be an option of the future. So when I graduated in 2015, I married my high school sweetheart in 2016, and we welcomed our first daughter into the world in 2017. So like the timeline went really fast for those few years. So like being a mom was always on the table. Yeah. Being a mom, young-ish, was also always on the table. I always position it as like selfishly, I want to be here to help raise my grandchildren. So I wanted to have kids as early as possible. So yeah, those 2 years were a fast timeline, but basically it just meant that I've been building my career pathing alongside stepping into parenthood and figuring out how to wear that hat. So I don't really know that was like an option. It was just like, that's the way. And that's what my husband and I both wanted. So that was an easy yes. Remote life is interesting because let me think about the years, 2019, at this point, I had been at 2 different SaaS companies and was promoted. One of the biggest overhead costs is like an office. And so especially for startups, if you can do your job without having all that overhead, it helps make your margins a lot more profitable, all of those things. So I was presented this option to start working remotely and was like, oh yeah, this will be amazing. At this point, I'm still living in Pleasant View. I was commuting an hour plus depending on Nashville traffic, to work every day there and back. So that's like 2 hours, 2.5 hours that I'm just sitting in a car, not really doing a lot for myself or those around me. And so, yeah, it was an obvious yes to work remotely. Selfishly, like the amount of things you can do with 2.5 extra hours in a day is kind of unreal. For yourself, for work, for your children.
Yes.
All of those things.
Yeah, the mental part would be just a big relief, I would think, that to say, as you mentioned, just not having the stress of having to put yourself through that. So you've sort of identified your work as being part of marketing solopreneurship.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I think that's how we're coining it these
Okay.
days. I can go into what that means.
So you're going to have to describe that for me, Kaylee, because even an acronym won't help me out there.
You're totally fine. You're totally fine. So I've spent the last 9 years or so in-house working full-time as a traditional W-2 at various startups, still in this B2B SaaS demand gen space. In the last 2 years, especially, the startup community was hit really hard. VCs, venture capital firms, stopped giving funding as frequently to startups, and private equity firms, same thing. So these startups were really struggling. And this side of the industry, I'm sure along with several other industries, really saw huge hits in terms of like mass layoffs and just overall like hard cuts from a business perspective. So I was in-house at this point, experiencing all this, sadly, like having to communicate this news to several of my peers and several of those that worked on my teams. And it took a hard toll, right? Like part of traditionally growing the corporate ladder means that you're stepping into a management role, you're managing others, you're managing yourself, all of those types of things. In order to grow, that's typically the route you take. So I took that route, but then found myself in this like very difficult management situation where I'm having to lay people off and I'm having to tell them that they no longer have a career here. And as a mom, or I don't know, just me, however I operate, it hit me really hard. One day in July of 2023, I woke up and was kind of like, okay, I had thought this was the path for me, but it's just taking a huge toll on me to have to make these types of decisions for others and their livelihood. What if I could do this solo? And so the way that I interpret solo is that for the last 9 years, I've had one income stream. I've been a W-2. I've been 100% focused on whatever company I'm working for at the time. In July, I made a switch. Now I have 3 revenue streams, sometimes 4, depending on however many clients I take on for that month or that quarter. And by diversifying my revenue streams, I've now de-risked my income. And I'm now responsible solo for myself. So I don't manage others. I'm not responsible for their livelihood. I don't have to make some of these hard career decisions for them. And instead, I just kind of plug in as like a hired gun to some of these early stage or mid stage B2B SaaS companies and help them unlock whatever growth programs they're trying to build for their business.
So they'll hire you on as you said, as a hired gun for a period of time, but it's never going to be for the next 5-10 years.
Exactly.
But and so you found that, because I saw some of the review, people just rave about you, about bringing you on in those kind of positions, and how you must have the ability to help other people feel at ease and comfort when you join them. What's the key to that success, Kaylee?
Yeah, I think that I am a copious note taker. So from the earliest days of me entering the workforce, I have always taken down notes and learnings and started creating almost like internal documentation for myself about how to launch campaigns, how to build infrastructure within software companies. I won't get into the nuances of all the things about demand gen, but everything that I could learn about demand gen, I've always documented. And today, now that is my IP. So I basically have a glorified Notion board that is my brain as a product inside of a Notion board. And when I plug into companies, you're getting access to me, all of the campaigns and all the experiences that I've had before, as well as everything that's in like documented fashion, so that we can plug in and make impact for businesses pretty quickly. And ultimately, for most of these businesses, it's like, yes, about making them feel good, but it's also about putting wins on the board. And I think because I'm pretty competitive, that works in my favor. But yeah, so I think that like, and this could be applicable for anybody. I'm sure most people are like, what the heck is B2B SaaS? But even if you want to enter into a manufacturing industry, like if you enter into the working world thinking that your brain is the product and that is ultimately your IP, finding ways to like monetize and create revenue streams out of that over time will become more obvious as you build that IP.
Yeah, I read one article that you wrote that your career path is like a product. And so can you explain that? I mean, is that similar to what you've been talking about?
Similar. I think that like the way that I wrote that article is like one layer deeper. Specifically in my world, there's almost like an ecosystem of things that a demand gen marketer needs to know, needs to understand how to set up, et cetera, in order to be successful. And so as I entered this B2B SaaS world, my first stop was at a CRM, which is basically like a database management system. I'm sure every company, every business, if you're not using Excel and you're using Salesforce or you're using, I think school systems use Blackbaud or others that are in that term. That's your CRM. So I started my B2B SaaS career inside of a CRM company, which helped me understand how to build a best-in-class CRM. So every business needs a best-in-class CRM. So that's part of my IP. I left there and I ended up going to an ESP solution, which is an email service provider. So think like MailChimp, Constant Contact, Campaign Monitor, others, right? So there I helped hundreds of thousands of customers build best-in-class email service providers and email solutions and campaigns while also building best-in-class for our own brand. Now that's part of my IP, right? Everybody is going to need to know how to do that regardless of what business you serve. That kind of became my guiding light for like when I'm ready to go on to the next stop and move to a different business, next stop in my career for whatever reason, what's going to be the next chapter in my IP, right? Now I know what CRMs should look like. I know what marketing solutions should look like. Next up for me was something was called an inbound buying solution, which is very specific to tech. But I ended up going there next because every business is going to need to understand how to operationalize that part of their business funnel. So yeah, I think about it like building a product. Like what piece do I need next in my brain that I could take with me and then go help at scale, plug into companies and help them operationalize this part of their business.
And so now you have your own, you founded Demand Loops, which is making yourself available to other companies. And so can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in July of last year, July of 23, I decided to go out and take on a handful of clients. I basically gave myself a 6-month window for success or failure. If 6 months in is not working, then we have to call it quits and I'll go back in house somewhere. But 6 months in, everything was looking good. So the way the business is structured right now is that I take on a handful of advisory clients. I take on a handful of pure consulting clients where I'm like actually hands on keyboard, helping them build infrastructure for their business. And then I also write a weekly newsletter on Substack that is monetized as well. So those are my 3 buckets of revenue streams. And then because I have opened myself up and am not positioning myself as a W-2, I've had a couple of other just like fun projects come my way. I'm becoming a script writer for a podcast this year. I'm acting as a character in a comedy skit for some LinkedIn snippets that'll come and hit the feed later this year. And then I've had several speaking engagements as well, where people will now contract me and pay me, fly me out to their conference to speak and give a keynote on whatever hot topic is relevant.
I can definitely understand why that would be of interest to other companies to have you come in and talk. Just amazing. And you are able to do this and still have that sort of flexibility, the freedom, as you mentioned, and the ability to grow your family, which I think you always mention. You're always upfront about that, about how important family is for you.
100%. And I think too that like it was hard for me, not to say that it's impossible, but it was hard for me in a W-2 8 to 5:30 structure, 8 to 5:30 hour commute, all those things, to be as involved with my children as I wanted to be. So yeah, this structure of being solopreneur, being a little bit more like inflexible with my working structure, allows me to like not miss field day and not miss pickup line on Fridays and take my kids to gymnastics. And like all of those things were really important to me. And it was just hard to tell your like full-time employer, hey, on Thursdays, I'm going to be off at 2:00 every Thursday to take my kids to gymnastics. They were like, we don't think so. Like you're going to be here. So, you just have to make trade-offs and that was fine at the time, but I was like constantly being motivated or driven to find a different solution. Like there's got to be a way to still make revenue and make an income stream that's like good and supports my family while also being able to be present with them. I just like wasn't going to quit until I could figure out a better balance. Like they're still young and I just don't want them to always remember me like staring at the laptop.
Yeah. I'm glad you took that viewpoint, but I'm also interested in finding out what's the latest Kaylee Sponge thing that you're learning and growing into, because since you've taken on this in the last year, how do you think what's the latest thing you've grown?
Oh, well, I think it's so interesting because it's like I've always been a sponge inside of marketing, but now that I'm like running my own business, which I say with quotes because I still like very much have imposter syndrome where I'm like, I'm still very much just winging it. I don't know what I'm doing. So now I'm like a CEO or like a more of a business operator than I ever have been or have ever had to be. So, like I just filed my first round of taxes as a solopreneur. Yikes. Like imposter syndrome at an all-time high. I'm now writing up contracts and like putting on my legal hat. I'm like reviewing, security reviews for different companies and trying to be put on my compliance hat. So I think that stepping in as a business operator has forced me to be a sponge in so many areas that I've never needed to or never had the opportunity to. And so, yeah, now I'm consuming all kinds of content about just basically how to be a solopreneur, how to be an operator, how to scale your business, right? Part of the benefits and pros of having your brain be the IP or the product is that there are still only 40 hours or however many hours you want to work in a week. And so trying to wrap my head around additional ways to scale my business without having to invest more hours into the business. Those are the types of things I'm like interested in consuming right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested to see what the next 10 years will bring your way. So that's it. It's really a great time to share with you. Our last question we always like to ask our guest would be, what kind of advice do you have for students?
Hopefully, all of these things are very obvious after listening to this episode. I would implore people to be a sponge, but more so than anything, I think that to be successful anywhere in any career opportunities or in life, it's all about relationships. So like we mentioned Julia and Sam on this podcast, Julia was my 8th grade best friend. She was one of my maids of honor. I was one of her maids of honor. Sam, her husband, and now my husband are great friends. And you know what I mean? Like they have been in our lives, I think now longer than we lived our lives without them. And so it's like all about relationships at no matter what point of your career or your, schooling you're in, form relationships with people around you. Like it will come back and help you tenfold. And obviously you'll be able to help them in opportunities too. But be a sponge to things around you. There are so many smart people out there that will always know more than you. Learn from them. And then just build strong relationships with your peers, your friends, your professors, whoever you've got. I think that's like the 2 biggest things that have helped me throughout my entire career, throughout my life. It always comes back to those 2 things.
Well, hopefully in the future, you and I will meet and I'll get to talk to you more about what's going on in your life, but it's been great to have you share your career and your story so far.
Likewise, I hope this made sense to anybody that was listening. If anybody's interested in B2B SaaS, please let me know. I would love to chat about it. But thank you for having me. This has been great.
And thanks to all our viewers out there for checking out today's podcast. We will continue to bring our alumni on from the College of Arts and Letters at Austin Peay State University on the podcast. So until next time, stay safe, take care, and God bless.